Hey everyone, my name is Ben Chaish, and this is going to be my review of the amazing Leica M10. Now, before I was even a photographer, I always thought these Leica cameras were just so cool. You would see them in movies, so I'm not gonna be sitting here and acting like everything is only function. The aesthetic definitely has something to do with my love of these cameras, but the functionality is the thing that actually keeps me using them for professional cameras. And I don't think I need to actually say this, but this video isn't sponsored by Leica. I would love that, obviously, because I just rave about their stuff all the time. But this video is sponsored by Cascade Presets, as well as my Patreon. All of the photos that you will see in this video were processed with my Cascade presets, and pretty much any photo that you see on this channel, if it wasn't shot on film, was made with my presets as well. And then my Patreon is a place where I usually post more in-depth information that maybe isn't as produced. I still usually sit here and, record with microphones and all this kind of stuff, but the videos are much more in-depth about the process and the hows and the whys, and a lot less of the what's kind of questions that I answer in my YouTube videos. It's the fact that everything just pulls back to the essentials of photography. You have your exposure triangle, just like boom, boom, boom on these cameras. And honestly, there's just something about the appeal that is sort of undeniable. And there's definitely a love-hate. It's either like you get it or you don't. And I know a lot of photographers that act as if they want to use a Leica camera, but when it comes down to it, it just doesn't make that much sense to too many people. But for me, these cameras really do make a ton of sense. Now, we'll start off with sort of like the basics. These things just have a, I think, 24 megapixel full frame sensor. They also came out in 2017. They're not exactly the newest cameras out there. Now, it's not that I didn't want to buy the M10s when they first came out. It's just the fact that they are stinking expensive. And as a wedding photographer, I have to buy two of whatever my primary camera was. And to buy two of them at the full retail price after tax is like $15,000, $16,000, which is not something that my wallet or business really wanted to look towards affording. But now that prices have come down enough that it made it affordable in about 4 years, I was able to make the jump. And it's mainly because these cameras did a couple things that the M240s didn't do for me. Now, the first of which is just the fact that they are smaller. I know I did a first impressions kind of review of these cameras when I first got them, and then compared them to my Leica M6 and my Leica M2, but mainly to the Leica M240. It feels weird to say that like the few millimeters of difference in the size would make that big of a difference, but in practice, it makes all the difference in the world. But just shaving off that little extra bit into this camera size that is the same size as the M2 and the M6, they just feel better. And there's nothing else I can say about it, but I guess I was kind of wrong about the significance of the size, being brought down to the M10. Another thing of note that was like the biggest difference was the viewfinder. They've definitely improved the viewfinder and made it larger, but it is one of those things where, I kind of notice it. It feels right. And so when you use it, it just feels right. But then when you go back to the older viewfinder, that's when you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is smaller. So it's one of those things that it just feels natural. So another one of those things that Leica did a really, really great job of kind of improving. The viewfinders and the size and the magnification of these cameras have been around since the 50s. So no one was asking for a bigger viewfinder for the most part, and they made it anyway, which is fantastic. Another thing that I brought up in that initial video was just the idea of this, ISO dial being like kind of a gimmick, I thought. But in practice, I like having all three things here. Maybe it would be easier if it was just a regular dial and you don't have to pull it up like this. But honestly, I have not found it to be weird or annoying in practice. And even if I did, you can switch it to the M dial and then just use the menus and stuff. But I've honestly kind of liked the more tactile feel of pulling the thing up and changing it to whatever you're at. It just feels more deliberate, I guess. And I think that is part of just the appeal of these cameras in general, is just feeling more deliberate about your photography, which is what a rangefinder kind of forces you to do. Another thing I talked about was just the more simplistic design of the back. Instead of like 5 different buttons, you just have 3. And I don't find myself missing the ISO button as I thought I might. And then obviously, some of the other ones, I don't even remember what they are. So the complete simplicity, that's kind of what draws people to Leica cameras in the first place. And again, kudos, simplicity, I love it. And then kind of on that same note of sorts, the batteries, I was anticipating being more disappointed in them than I was. So they definitely made the batteries a lot smaller in the M10 from the M240, but I haven't found it to be detrimental enough to really make a difference. As a wedding photographer, I actually have 5 of them, and I had, I think, 4 for the M240. I honestly haven't found it to be that big of an issue, and for personal stuff, I can go days without changing the batteries and still be in pretty good shape. So as much as some people kind of complain about the battery life as well, I haven't seen it be much of an issue for me. As you can sort of see, I have a silver version and a black version, which is kind of nice for comparisons like these, so you can kind of see and feel the differences and whatnot. I just figured if I was going to have to buy 2, I might as well buy 1 of each, kind of separate them out a little bit, look a little bit more distinct. And I really like both of them for their different kind of characteristics and stuff. It is kind of fun to swap the lenses back and forth, but in general, I still kind of keep the 28 on the black body and then the 50 Summilux on the silver body. And just the pairing of the two, having everything kind of match and stuff, just looks so good. And then this camera is much more kind of, classic in its look. Obviously looks exactly like a camera from, the 60s or 50s or whatever. And then this one, is just much more stealth, much more like street photography. It's just all black, and this is the wider lens. So kind of popping in to people a little bit closer with this one, I've kind of just decided to do, my wide angle be the black version, and then the silver one be the more classic 50 millimeter. And I find those two things pair really well. Now, one of the things I get a lot of comments on as well, especially in these Leica forums with all of these nerds who want to get angry about things like this, is the fact that I've covered up the Leica red dot, the iconic red dot of the Leica, with tape. And yes, people are upset about it. And, they think it's just like dumb hipster stuff. But recently I was at a wedding and I was photographing, and the groom asked if my cameras were from the Food Network. And so if you've ever looked at the Leica logo, it also looks exactly like the Food Network logo, and vice versa. And even though, Leica's, I'm sure, had it for longer, it was just one of those things where I realized like having a red circle in the middle of my camera was distracting. And so I was kind of going back and forth on whether to kind of cover them up like this. And that was one of those things that just like put it back to solidifying. Yeah, I'm just going to cover it up. I like the more sleek look. And then it also just brings a little bit less distraction to whatever my subject is. I'm not trying to cover it up for people that know it's a Leica, and I would rather them just not see words and logos and stuff like that. And these can just be like my little photography tools, and that's kind of it to the outside viewer. Now, the thing that ultimately drew me to upgrade to these cameras that my Leica M240s weren't doing, all of the other features, yes, are great. And I really like a lot of the kind of upgrades and stuff like that the M10 has. But the main thing ultimately was just the higher ISO performance. Now, it's definitely not like worlds difference, but I feel like I'm getting like a stop and a half, 2 stops-ish of light. And that's honestly what I need as a wedding photographer. If I have to, I feel like I can push it to like 12,800 or 12,500, I think is how it's labeled in here. But the M240s, I really didn't ever want to shoot above 3,200 and only 6,400 in like the worst of pinches. And even at that, they were pretty tough. I like my aesthetic and my whole experience for my clients to be very minimal. Obviously, that goes really well with these cameras. But then also, I really enjoy not using flash a ton to screw up kind of moments that are happening during a wedding day. And so having the higher ISO performance allows me to not be as distracting by using a flash in some situations and whatnot. And yeah, I've found it to be really, really invaluable and totally worth the upgrade for me. Now, is buying a Leica M10 worth it? I think that's what a lot of people are going to be asking. And I'll probably borrow a couple more Fujifilm cameras from some people at some point. So if you want to watch that video or want me to make that one, leave a comment below and we can talk about it. But like they do have an aesthetic. There is just a feel, and there's something inspiring about seeing this on my shelf. I take these all the time, all over the place. These are both my daily carry camera and my full professional camera. So, just having that as a flexible option of sorts just is kind of a beautiful thing to be inspired by your tools. I don't know, there's just something to say about that. It's definitely not for everybody. The rangefinder focusing, and I'll do probably a video specifically on that, is definitely not for everybody. I would say the look, I can't imagine people not liking the look of these cameras. And if you don't, I mean, that's totally fine. But I just think they are the best looking cameras in existence. I don't think any other camera that is a modern digital camera of any sorts can really hold a candle to this. Even, some of the other Fujifilm cameras, that have some really good aesthetics are beautiful, but there's just something about the exact classic design that Leica has been making for 60, 70 years that is just so beautiful and inspiring. Maybe if you're the person that's watching this video, you feel the same way, but I'm sure I'm going to get comments about just being kind of obsessed with how they look and not how they function. But as you can see in these images, they are professional tools that I am making professional work with. And for my brand and who I am and how I photograph, they just work so stinking well. Even though they came out in 2017 and are definitely nowhere near a lot of the technology of many of the cameras that are coming out from basically every other camera manufacturer, there's just something about the simplicity and the inspiration that I draw from these cameras and how they're used that I honestly do think slows me down and makes me a better photographer. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions about these, I'm sure I'm going to make another video, in a few months or whatever about these. So please drop them in the comments below. And if you want to see any more videos about this or, a comparison between the Fujifilm and stuff like that, as someone that's used both fairly extensively, drop that comment below as well, because, it's going to be a lot of work to do a video comparing the two, but I think it would be probably pretty beneficial for a lot of people who, might want to try one thing either way. And if you've made it this far, please consider subscribing if you aren't already. It would really help me out, as well as hitting that like button. I know it's super annoying that YouTubers ask you to do that kind of stuff, but it's because that's just how the game works on this channel. So would definitely appreciate likes, comments, subscribes, all that kind of stuff to get this video and my stuff out to more people. So thanks again, and I will see you on the next one.